producer at OtherSide Entertainment, and today we are going to be taking a peek at Stalker Clear Sky, the last of the Stalker series, and their faction system, and talking a little bit about our faction system. As usual, Will's going to be driving, and he's actually never seen this game before, so this should be interesting. And we also have Tim Stelmach and Paul Neurath with us. Hi, guys.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Chris.
So, Will, why don't you just load in the last save or join the game there? Okay. So this is actually really early in the game. What you did right now, and just remind you that everything is always in real time in this game. This is the swamp, and there's only two factions that the player knows about right now. Faction 1, which is Clear Sky, who you're fighting for, and the Renegades, who are just the generic bandit bad guy. Okay. So right now, Will's mission is to clear out some of the swamp and take over the enemy base. One of the things with the factions in this game is, because it's an FPS, it really comes down to you're doing really one thing with them, which is killing the other factions. You do get some rewards and whatnot, and maybe some other NPCs that you can talk to, but for the most part, it's about getting better equipment from certain factions or certain rewards that come out of it. But the only interaction that's really going on here is you hunting down and destroying other factions. Now, how would our factions differ from that?
Oh, well, I mean, I'll start with just one way in which I think there's similarities here that we're looking at what are the core actions in the game, and how do those tie into what that faction's goals are, what they want to achieve, right? In our case, of course, not being a shooter, we are focusing not exclusively on combat, right? So we can look at a variety of other options, including the faction's goals for our environmental simulation is one that we've definitely talked about a great deal. We've talked about how politics is largely about solving problems of resource allocation, right? And so in that sense, the faction system and the environmental system are very sort of natural complements to each other. Also, hopefully will solve neatly some problems about surfacing to the player a lot of the things that go on in the environmental simulation, right? The environmental simulation, kind of by definition, happens over this large scale that's hard to observe. And any system, I think, is only as good to some extent as its ability to expose its workings to the player. So that factions our goal is to have them serve as kind of color commentary on the player's actions in the world in that respect. So, I mean, we can start from sort of similar points of view of what is the core action in the game and how is that relevant to the factions. There's obviously a big difference between the two games in terms of what those kinds of activities can be. Any other?
And I'll add just an entirely different kind of comment in that Will's actually pretty good at these games, but Stalker is a very brutal, difficult game. You die a lot. so don't blame Will. But yeah, I mean, one of the things about the faction system in Stalker, which has absolutely loose similarities, is that each of the factions has areas that it's trying to control each group. And you can kind of wander into an area, and if you depopulate that faction, kill enough of them, I think that the typical dynamic is that another faction will then sort of move in and take over that territory. So there is kind of a nice dynamics between which factions control the territory, and where the player can be an agent in shifting the power balance over a piece of turf.
That's a great point, Paul. This is actually one thing I was saying during my discussion with Chris. We started off, I sort of jokingly said that Stalker had one verb, to murder. But I quickly sort of had to correct myself, right? It has at least one other verb, which is to run, right? And as soon as you have that element in there, there's the notion of control of territory, right? And that is a sort of much more systemic approach than you see even some other games that have faction systems that might be primarily oriented on like conquests, right? Where like every 15 pigs I kill, the dwarves get +1 faction for me, or whatever it might be. A lot of you have probably played MMO games with similar sorts of very, very structured kind of faction systems. And the notion of including a kind of strategic control of territory element, right? Even in what you might think of as a very simple game like a shooter, illustrates the kind of things that you can do when you take a little bit more systemic approach to a faction's goals.
Will's here running into one of the things. Will's here running into one of the things I like about Stalker is that, a gun battle isn't just I'm doomed to range. These things can actually end up being really drawn out for a good 5 or 10 minutes. So there's bleed out effects, almost more RPG stuff going on. Cheating right in front of us. Not that it seems to matter.
Will needs all the help he can get.
Here, Will, let me give you a hint. Look for cover and look for things that you can shoot through. They very strategically set up things with like portholes to shoot through in some of these areas. There, pro tip. And yes, the first time I went through this, I died about 35 times in the swamp until I got used to the game. So he's I don't want to say, but he's not on the hard difficulty setting. There is, but what happens is at the lowest difficulty setting, the AI just goes dumb, and so you actually like the faction cards won't work, right? So if Will is patient, and if you hit P, Will, you're under. And then you look at the map. If you scroll around, you'll see that there's little green dots occasionally. Sometimes those guys will come and help you. You don't have any help right now. So good luck with that.
That actually, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but one thing was to set expectations. Our previous Twitch streams, not only were we kind of more familiar with territory in terms of playing immersive sims, right? But we had a lot more familiarity with the game, and our point in those shows was more that for each one, like we had some preconceived notions about what points we want to illustrate, like what it was going to help us communicate about Underworld Ascendant. This is somewhat different, right? Like this is a little bit more getting into the part of our development process where we are sharing the process with the backers and with perhaps potential backers. This is my first eyes on this game, and we're going to be drawing whatever conclusions we can as we go. It's sort of more a live development session here, so enjoy that.
All right, so Will's gonna backtrack a little bit here and try to take out a smaller base faction because he doesn't have anybody backing him up right now. Like factions will come and help him out, which makes it significantly easier. I like how it's game over every time and not just like you died. It's like no, you have to start all the way over.
So in Stalker, how do you ally with a particular faction? How's that done?
Okay, so with this particular faction, they rescue an event that happened, and they put you sort of in a no-win situation. They were basically like, "Hey, you can help us do this, or not. But if it's not, we're not going to let you leave the base." Right? So they were totally railroading you into this particular situation. Later on, it's meeting NPCs, and they kind of hook you up with a faction, and you can sort of tilt the balance a little bit too by selectively.
So is the game choosing factions for you to ally with, or how much player choice is there in picking a faction or switching the current faction that they're allied with?
After this one, yeah. Sure can. Bring down the audio. Will's a professional game designer. Can you tell? Oh yeah, we'll turn down the game and up the mics in a second. So later on, after this initial area, there is a lot of player choice in picking which faction you're going to go with. Looking at it as a game designer, really it comes down to each area sort of has the good faction and the bad faction. So when you get towards the end game, you end up being either on the good side or the bad side. Of course, what you think is the good side or the bad side could be completely different than mine, but like at the end, it's the freedom guys who are, we want peace in the world, and the totalitarian state are the last two factions that you're into.
Which of those is good factions?
Oh, the totalitarian state, of course. No. Well, order, regimented, right? Just like the Empire. No?
It's nice. I mean, maybe one difference then in our approach, this is Paul, in factions for Underworld Ascendant, is that, there's never any clear good or bad between the three factions, the main factions, and the Dark Elves and Dwarves and the Shamblers. They each have their legitimacy, they each have their motivation. But there's no, not like one is good or one is evil. And a little different approach to maybe factions in a game like Stalker.
Yeah. Well done. All right, restart, dude. I agree. I think one of the things that's interesting with the pre-production that we've been talking about with the three factions is, dealing with a triangle instead of an us versus them. I think opens up a whole more interesting dynamic to play around with. Then it makes it much more interesting for the player to choose, between three things pulling against each other instead of just, good and bad or.
Yeah, I mean, interesting or different. I mean, with the three factions, you've got that, the triangle interaction. Clearly in Stalker, it's more about taking a piece of territory or clearing out a piece of territory, turf war kind of game. One faction versus another faction seems to be the dominant mode, which fits this kind of gameplay. And I haven't played Stalker really, so like Tim, I'm a novice to this game. But so another question would be, if you start, can you play traitor to your faction? If you start fighting your own faction guys, do they turn on you, or do they realize you're doing that?
There's always a little bit of tolerance, but yes, they will turn on you, and yes, you won't be able to. The word gets out that so you can't go to the stores anymore. It's amazing how that word gets out. The birds, yeah.
That's actually, I mean, it's one of the things that I was wondering about, like how much to get into this, but one of the things that comes up a lot with these systems is just how information is spread within a faction, right? Like, does someone even need to witness your actions in order for it to count? If they do, does it matter? Like that, is there does the rest of the faction just like magically communicate with them, or is there a notion of making sure that the witnesses do not rat on you, right? Like all these are things that like have come up in discussions about this sort of thing, and it's a trade-off, right, between how much you want to have a sense of realism, and how much you are introducing complications that may be just opaque to the player.
One of the things that I go back and forth on that thought myself is, on some level,